Thanks, Brandon. Everybody, welcome to the I Did It My Way solo founder panel. We have two incredible solo founders with us today who I'll tell you about in just a moment. But first, just want to say thank you to all of you who are attending and to our two panelists. And some of you who are in attendance may have just come from the Navigating Co-Founder Relationships panel. This is the opposite side of that. You don't deal with those issues, but you may deal with some other issues unique to being a solo founder. So now, introduce our fantastic guests. We have Christina Chi, who's the CEO of Data Bento. It's an on-demand market data platform. She previously founded Domeyard LP, which is a hedge fund focused on high-frequency trading that at its peak traded up to $7.1 billion US per day. Christina is also busy as a member of the MIT Corporation, MIT's Board of Trustees, co-chair of the board of Invest in Girls. She also sits on the board of directors of the Financial Executives Alliance Hedge Fund Group. She drives entrepreneurship efforts at the MIT Sloan Boston Alumni Association and served on the U.S. nonprofit board committee of 100 Women in Finance. She was also selected for Forbes 30 Under 30 list and is now a board member of that list. Christina got her bachelor's in management science from MIT. So very welcome, Christina. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's always embarrassing to hear that bio.
And now I want to give contactless payments. Derek graduated cum laude from Worcester State University, where he won their first ever business competition. And following graduation, Derek was selected for Dell EMC's Marketing Development Rotational Program, where he led various initiatives, including their hybrid cloud program. Derek volunteers with Framingham State University Foundation Board and the WPI Tech Advisory Network. And according to his LinkedIn, he also enjoys boxing and drone flying. Derek, thanks for being here with us.
Happy to be here.
So the theme of this panel is going at it as a solo founder. We're going to focus primarily on the questions around that, such as, am I a good fit to be a solo founder? Who should I rely on to be my support network? Don't have a co-founder, but I have family, friends, investors, advisors, other people in my network who can support me. We'll touch on topics like that. So to start off, starting with you, Christina, can you, in your own words, tell us a bit your journey and decision-making process for becoming a solo founder?
Thanks for having me, Jake and Derek. It's so great to be here today. So actually, the first thing I should clarify is I'm actually not a solo founder. I do have a co-founder, but I can definitely speak for solo founders in general and kind of what that process is like. There's a lot of things I have founded on my own as well. So I guess technically I am, but not for my current company. So I'll tell you that kind of the process behind kind of each decision and why I decided to start each one either on my own or like with a team. I guess the first thing is like, I know for some of you who are here today, you might have Googled like, statistics on solo founders, right? And I know I was doing that last night. I was like, oh, I want to come in with some like actual knowledge on what are the success rates. And actually, they did show some graphs and charts with, with companies that have raised, like Crunchbase data on companies that have raised over $10 million, right? And you notice almost 50% are started by companies with solo founders, or you look at exit rates of companies as well, and like how many of them have a solo founder or co-founder as well. And it's interesting to see. I mean, it's also very clear, at least for like, I think it's for-profit companies, that there's a huge portion of them that do have solo founders. And although, of course, the data is pretty inaccurate, I mean, on Crunchbase, it lists me as a solo founder for every company I've ever started. And I know for a fact that's not true. And so there's a lot of, inaccuracies there. However, it doesn't mean that it's completely inaccurate. And also, a lot of the companies I do know as well, they are started by solo founders and they end up doing extremely well. So I think a lot of it just comes down to, if you have a great idea at the time and you can go about doing it, why you don't necessarily need to have a team of people, right? And we'll talk about this later during the panel, but like co-founder issues, that's a very big thing. And I've seen a lot of startups break up because of co-founder issues, because one co-founder, sues the other co-founder or leaves the company. Issues come up like that all the time. And so it does lead to more issues, especially just depending on your situation. So I would say like there's no one that you don't necessarily need to go on your own, but you also don't necessarily need to have a team. And so it's just basically whatever your circumstance is the best one for you. So don't listen to I know Paul Graham of Y Combinator and a bunch of other organizations, right? They'll tell you stuff like you have to be, they won't even look at solo founders, some of these VCs. And, but yeah, I understand why, right? Like having another founder is supposedly increases your chances, or having another founder is like a sign of, what do you call it? Like the biggest sign of almost like a confirmation that you're doing something interesting, that it's something great. It's if another human being believes in your idea. And I understand that, but you can also hire them as an employee, right? And like startups don't wait. You have to just start it. You can't just wait around and find a co-founder. I've had actually one of my friends who's been looking for a co-founder for the past 3 or 4 years before starting, fully working on a startup. And you imagine 3 or 4 years is a lifetime in this business, right? Like you could have scaled and hired employees and gotten sold. And, there's a lot of things that could happen in that period of time. And so that's the other thing is like startups don't really wait. Ideas don't wait. And society is not going to wait for you to be able to find, that perfect team. You just have to go for it. So, yeah.
Thanks, Christina. Derek, so you are a solo founder for your most recent. Christina's done both sides. What's your perspective on being a solo founder? What's your journey? How do you decide to go out on your own?
Yeah, well, first of all, excited to be here, Jake. Christina, it's a pleasure to be on the panel with you, and hello, everyone who's listening in. I think Christina made a really, really great point that absolutely resonates with me, is that being in a startup, like you can't just sit down waiting for a co-founder. And I think that's a little bit of my story. When I first started working on ParaPay, there's a lot of timeliness that comes with starting a business, especially when you're publicly communicating you're starting a business. And with my passion and energy, I was like, look, I'm just going to start marching towards, putting this idea together, learning as much as I can, and kind of naturally became a solo founder. But although I'm technically a solo founder, I have partners and team members who I treat almost like co-founders, where they are a big part of my decision-making process. And I think part of our success so far has been because of my ability to put together a really, really great team around me. And I think that sometimes there's a stigma that if you're a solo founder, that means you have to do everything by yourself. But that's not at all the case. Your ability as a leader to be able to formulate a team, have really, really clear vision to be able to communicate that with your team members, and be able to raise the necessary funds or generate the necessary revenue to be able to grow that is really important. And I think that's kind of how I see my role today. It's like, all right, if I get the right people in the right roles in our company, then we can be able to scale. Our customers will be happy. We'll be able to attract more talent as well too, get the funding that we need. And so I think being a solo founder, although there's like a million things you could be doing, being hyper focused on what to do, when to do it, and how to do it is the most critical thing, because you have less time than everybody else and it's easy to get distracted, and you have to be disciplined and say, look, like number one job, we need to find this really rock star CTO who's been there, done that, and just managed all of our engineers in that, right? So as we're continuing to grow, there are other key areas, and so being focused and being intentional about your journey as a solo founder is really critical, because like Christina said, time doesn't wait. You have to keep moving.
Thanks, Derek. There's a question. Why don't you jump in? Do you think there's a philosophical difference between people who are more suited for the solo founder route versus going at it with a co-founder or co-founders? Like, is there a person who is at their heart a solo founder and they should just dive into that versus someone who at their heart needs a co-founder? Christina, you've done both, so what's your take on that?
Yeah, I would say kind of, right? Like obviously a solo founder, you have to have the confidence to go about this on your own. You might have to wear multiple hats. You might have to play CTO one day, CEO the next, until the company grows big enough and you hire enough employees to like have a full-time CTO. And so there's a lot of roles like that. I've definitely noticed that a lot of the solo founders I meet, they've done it a few times or they've had a lot more experience in the industry, just on average. But that doesn't mean that, I've also seen students who are solo founders and they do great, and they have the confidence to go out there and do it. So it really depends. And then I have noticed though that there are some people, there's a lot of people I meet who don't have that confidence, or they know they're like, I don't have the skill set to play CTO and CEO and whatever other roles are really important on day one, and that might be true. And so then there's the challenge of, okay, how do you find like a technical co-founder? And that's a whole different topic on its own. but absolutely, I would say like, a lot of times in the solo founder, you don't have to be technical. So let me just be clear about that. Most of the solo founders I know are actually non-technical people, and they hire the right people on their team. And so a lot of it just depends on like when you're at this idea stage, right? And you're working on this product, like how long are you working on it before you find the right person? Have you already launched by the time you're already generating revenue by the time you hire your first technical person? That's very likely, that happens a lot in this space. And then when you hire them, then, they're your employee, right? Because you're right, your MVP has been built pretty much, like a lot of the idea has been scoped out. And so at that stage, like it's, sometimes people recommend just call them an initial hire instead. So there's small distinguish, you distinguish it here and there, but yeah, it all depends on, what's best for you and the timing in your company. So Derek, I'll pass it to you.
Well, a lot of things you said absolutely resonate because I'm non-technical. I think there's a difference between understanding your technology and being technical, because it's not an excuse to not know your technology stack and how your technology works. Especially, we're working in payments, which is a very highly regulated and highly, technology field. So I know my technology inside and out. That's very important, but I don't personally write the code. And so being able to find people around you who can be able to do that is really important. That kind of comes back to the team thing and your ability to be able to surround yourself with the right people. But I think also when you think about being a solo founder, I think it's just like, have you done it before? If you've done it before, that makes things a lot easier because you have a track record of, some success or, raising funds and whatnot. I know that there were definitely some challenges I had initially, having this be my first tech company, where like people are like, oh, well, you have to have a technical co-founder and you have to have these things, because of what I've learned is that a lot of investors, they want to invest in things that look normal. And so there's patterns that happen when you look at companies. And so it's naturally a little bit easier if you can fall into that, oh, we have a team of this, and our team has a CEO, a CTO, and a VP of sales, and this is our team structure, and this is how we're going to grow. So when you take that structure away, you naturally get a lot more questions of like, okay, well, how are you going to find these people if it's just you? And the early days was rough. It was absolutely rough for sure. But there's definitely a level of conviction that comes with it of like, hey, we need to really find the right people. And part of me saying, look, I'm going to go solo is because we didn't find the right partners when I first started working on this. And when we started bringing in technical people, by then we already had our kind of MVP ready designed out. We already had some commitments for our first customers to be able to move forward. And so when we brought in, the technical team, we had a lot of things already in place. But I think one of the most important things I'll highlight is when you're building your team, being very intentional about what your relationships like with those team members is really important as well too. Because although I'm like, this founder and CEO and, I could just go around waving a stick and say, you do that, that's not how I manage my team. I'm very collaborative. I try and let my team members make other decisions that aren't necessarily critical decisions, because I want them to be involved and engaged and really feel like they have a part of the business as well too. So I do think it is important that even if you're a solo founder, make sure you really value your team members and understand what's important to your team members so that they are really in the boat when you're growing. Because if they're not a founder, it can be easier for them to transition outside of the business. So making sure that you're in alignment with them and you have that line of communication is absolutely critical.
So a question on that, Derek, is about relationship with employees versus relationship with a co-founder. I'm sure lots of people listening are thinking, what is actually the difference between a co-founder versus a first employee? It's kind of arbitrary. Like, you treat your first employee, you give them a lot of ownership, you respect them, you want them to make critical decisions. But at the end of the day, there's still not a co-founder. They don't have the prestige as much, and they don't have the same level of equity. How do you think about balancing your relationship with your employees, given that they don't have the same startup world societal status as co-founders?
Yeah, it's a really great question, Jake. I think part of it is one is understanding what the objective is of that first team member who's coming on board, right? Being very, very clear what success looks like for them, because especially when you're talking like technical talent, I mean, people who just go work for Facebook and go to Google and get paid tons and tons of money that, like us as a smart startup, like couldn't, especially in the early days, couldn't compete with, right? So understanding, well, why is this person going to take a massive salary cut to come and join me full time? And being really intentional about how do I provide an environment where they feel like their needs are being met. So, for example, when we brought on board our CTO recently, he joined us February of this year. He previously came from a startup that had raised a bunch of money, and he ran the engineering team and did really well there, and was interviewing for places like Facebook and others. And so, I knew I could compete financially, but I said, well, what's important to you? And he said, well, I've experienced managing and leading and growing engineering teams, but I want to get exposure into the areas like fundraising and understanding other areas of the business. And he's like, I don't have to be the decision maker on sales, but I want to learn more about it. And I'm like, cool, great. So when we're having like a big enterprise customer, like I bring them to the events, where I bring them to the trade shows, I bring them in the room. When we're having investor conversations, usually by the second meeting, he's on the call with me, and we're working together on that as well. So it's really, and then also it's really great signaling for other investors and other people as well too, because it shows that you have a community inside the business as well. So it's not just, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, the business is going to fall apart, because we have a great team around us. So really, I think the most important thing really just communication. Because if he said, hey, the most important thing for me to just be heads down writing code all day, like for me to pull him out of that environment and put him in somewhere and say, hey, let's go talk to this investor about, X, Y, and Z, he's not going to like that. And so making sure I have that clear line of communication with all of our team members of where they want to grow in the business, where they see their roles evolving. And then as we grow, the goal is that, they would have that sense of ownership as well too. So there's a lot of big decisions that I technically don't have to pull them into, but I operate from a position of transparency. Say, look, hey man, I'm thinking about this decision. I'll love your feedback, right? Like, he's managed more people than I've managed in my career. So when it comes to making like decisions on our team, I'd say, hey man, I love your input on this. And I technically don't have to do that, but because I do that, he feels even more invested into it. So his DNA is absolutely woven within our business. Same with all of our team members.
Yeah, I think one thing I should quickly mention is that it's also self-selecting to an extent, right? Sometimes when someone joins the company, they're like, I don't want 50% equity. I want a salary because I need that money to pay my rent or to pay for my family or whatever expenses. And they don't want the risk of, an initial founder. There's a sacrifice that a founder has to make, which is you take a huge salary cut. If not, just some founders take no salary for a while. And you get all the equity in the company, you get the upside, but it's like high risk, high reward. It's that kind of, thing, right? It's super high risk. Whereas a lot of people, they're like, I don't want to take that risk in my life. Either they're not ready to, or they don't want to for any reason. And so sometimes you just find someone and you're like, well, you be a co-founder? They're like, no, but if you pay me XYZ, I'll become your first employee. And that's something I've definitely seen a lot. The other thing I should mention is that, there's a lot of stats on this I've read about, and I've definitely seen this from personal experience as well through almost all the businesses I've worked on, which is the first employee of any company almost never works out. And I know that's a hard fact to hear. Not a fact, but it's, it's very rare for the first employee to work out. And the reason why is because your first employee is the founder that gets like 1% equity and hardly any salary either, because you don't have any, your pre-revenue probably at that stage. And, it's a tough role to play. And also, the first employee is usually your friend from college, your classmate, your fraternity brother, right? It's someone you probably know, your immediate network. But what ends up happening is as you scale and grow and you start to hire outside of your network, and you hire that engineering manager that comes in and they're like, what does this person build? Like their code sucks, or they don't know what they're doing. And then, the first employee either ends up getting fired or they end up leaving or burning out for various reasons like that, because they really are the founder with like 0%, almost 0% equity or 1% equity that comes on. And so it's hard to kind of manage that. It's one thing I've kind of discovered over time is like just by almost statistically speaking, that first employee almost never works out. But for everyone else, it's very much self-filtering. Like they'll decide on if they want to be a founder and take on, all the equity, but almost no salary, or if they prefer the opposite in their lives. And so that's one thing just to point out. Yeah.
Christina, I was the first employee of my college friend's startup. A lot of that resonates. And now I'm no longer with them, but I run my own business. But that's definitely an issue. And that's an issue for not just solo founders, but it's part of what solo founders think about is how do you handle your first hire? If you're a solo founder, you haven't gone through the dance of finding a co-founder yet, but now you have this responsibility of bringing someone onto your team. What are things you all think about when bringing the first person onto your team, where now you're not just responsible for yourself, but this other human being?
I can jump in on that. One, it's terrifying. So I think we should just like put that out there. I mean, it's absolutely a scary decision. But it's like dating to get married, right? And so I think the biggest thing, and I think is a big theme about building teams in general, is just communication. Christina made a really great point. Some people are more motivated by salary than equity, and some people have other life responsibilities that require them to be able to do certain things. And if you can't meet those kind of basic, hierarchy of needs, if you will, that's going to make it a really, really tough relationship for them to be able to be full focused on the business full time as well too. So when actually making that decision, there's a study that basically shows that the first hires usually come directly from like your immediate friend circle. And so, although I did the LinkedIn and the angel list and all that stuff, really what I did was I just leaned into my network and just said, hey, look, this is what we're looking for. This is the type of person we're looking for. Is there anyone that you recommend that we can be able to talk to? And that was really helpful. And so being very vocal about what you're looking for and why people should come join you, I think is important. And then also being really selective. I remember when I first started, I was like, I just need someone technical to build it. And then I remember I had a conversation with my mentors. He's like, look, you need to actually change that mindset, because this first person that you bring in is going to have a real material impact on your culture, on your technology, and even future hires moving forward as well too. So it's a really critical hire. One thing that I actually recommend that I actually did with one of our first hires was we actually did a trial period. We said, look, let's work together for like 2-3 months. If it works out, great. If it doesn't work out, no harm, no foul. Luckily, he was in a position where he was able to do that financially. We also had a little bit of cash in the bank, so we could actually compensate him for some of this time as well too. But because he was really invested, he's like, look, man, like don't worry about paying me right now. I just want to like support you because I knew the guy. We became friends through the network. But it was just like this trial period, right? 3 months. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, no harm, no foul. So I think that's one of the practical tips I would recommend when trying to find your first hire. If they can do that, just spend time with them. Also, it's good to be able to figure out like outside of just the work environment, like your relationship as well too, right? So like, for example, with our CTO now, like we talked about, I love to box. Him and I go boxing every now and again. And like we do a lot of outside of work activities. So like we have a genuine friendship beyond work. So when work gets challenging, there's more of a relationship beyond just, I'm his employer kind of thing, right? And making sure you manage those dynamics intentionally with the people that you bring in, I think is really good. And then that goes directly back to that same thing again, is communication, communication, communication. So when you're talking to people, communicate what's important to you, your work styles. Do you like to work late? Do you wake up early? And finding a dynamic that makes sense for both of you is really critical. And if they're not the right fit, that's okay. Just keep looking.
Absolutely. I totally agree, Derek. When we hired our first employees, I was just thinking back to some of those cases where sometimes it was people in our network. I think actually more often than not, it's just someone in our network who we've known. And that meant, back when we were students starting our first company, that it was literally a fraternity brother of one of my, so that happens, right? And I was thinking the only thing that I wish we had done better was set the right expectations with them at the very beginning, and help them understand what this is, that we're an early stage company, and that this is pre-revenue, that we haven't launched yet, and to kind of help them understand what the risks and rewards are of an early stage company. I think that would have been helpful. The other thing I wish that we should have known earlier is that when it comes to, I guess, companies like this, let's say if you want to hire someone, it's probably someone right? And the problem with that is we were friends beforehand. And when you hire them and you sign that contract that says now you're an employee, almost like legally speaking, you are first and foremost employer and employee, right? On a legal agreement. What if something goes wrong? What if you have to fire them, or they leave the company and they totally hate you, or, there's situations that happens, unfortunately. And something that I think is really important to think about is, on paper, you're first and foremost employer and employee, and the friendship comes second. And we have had situations where the friendship no longer exists. The friendship disappeared because our working relationship also kind of went sour. And so those are really, really important things to consider. It is a risk. Hopefully everyone wants things to work well and company succeeds. And, and then the first employee hopefully feels like they're being paid enough and that they're doing well enough that, they feel like they're motivated enough to stay. But in the worst case where, more often than not, they leave, how do you make sure that you can maintain, if you had an existing friendship, right, to maintain that friendship is definitely a very hard thing to do. I unfortunately don't have a solution to that because I think it's a case-by-case basis, but definitely at the beginning, if you can set the right expectations with them, and help them understand that even if they end up leaving, that, there's no hard feelings, and that I think that's really important to establish at the beginning as well, so that they don't secretly go behind your back and, tell a lot of people, oh, I hate this job, and let them tell you directly, right? If you establish that communication channel, they can tell you they're not satisfied with this role and they want to move on, and that's totally okay. And that way, hey, at least you can hopefully keep that friendship going separately, or if you're, sometimes it's family members, right? You might have either, whether it's kids or your cousins or whatever it is, you definitely don't want to be on bad terms with them. So yeah, please just establish the right expectations moving forward, the right kind of boundaries on, when to talk about work and when to not talk about work, or what kind of behavior is considered professional in the workplace. Sometimes, if it's family members, right, they might be more casual, but then if you have another employee who's not family, they might feel a little bit awkward, in that kind of situation. And so just making sure to understand what the expectations are, and also about exiting too. If someone wants to leave the firm for whatever reason, that there's no hard feelings and that they're welcome to leave, so long as they do their best job while they're here, so long as they communicate to you whenever they're not satisfied. I think those are just important expectations to set. Yeah.
So we've talked a bit about the employee side of it, building the team. Each of you touched a bit on challenges of fundraising and convincing investors that you're the real deal. I want to focus now more on the personal side of it. So a big reason people are hesitant to start a solo founded business is because it can be lonely. It is you. How do you each deal with
I can jump in on that. I mean, it's definitely lonely. I mean, it can be, let me put it, it can be lonely if you choose to allow it to be lonely. I have had a mentor who told me, he's like, being a CEO is really hard. So you need to build a circle around you that you can be radically transparent with. And I think that that's probably one of the best advice that I've ever gotten. Because when things are always good, that means things are never good. And being able to have people that you can honestly say, look, I had a bad day today, right? Because we all have those. There are days where like you feel like things are on fire and you need people that you can come to, pick up the phone and call and say, look, I need help. And being able to be intentional about building that, whether it's an advisory board or your board of directors or mentors or coaches. You know, I was a part of Mass Challenge Boston, and I was also part of the DCU FinTech Innovation Center. So I naturally put myself in communities where I had those people, like, you know, and there's a list of people I can tell you. I pick up the phone, call them and say, oh my gosh, like things are on fire. And they're like, Derek, relax, it's not that bad, right? And sometimes you have to have those people that will talk you off the ledge because there's some really challenging times and curveballs that come around. So I think it's just being intentional about it. I think also secondly is having a culture of like transparency and communication is good as well too, because being able to like recognize when your team members are not feeling that great, it's I think it's really important to be able to do, because there's always going to be changes and challenges associated with that. So, and there's a lot of resources for finding, you know, mentors and coaches. You know, we went through Techstars New York recently, so that was a really great community that surrounds other great advisors and mentors and coaches. But I personally have my circle of people that like I know that no matter what happens, whether it's business related, whether it's a personal relationship, whether it's just a challenge that I'm going through. I mean, COVID has been a curveball for everybody, and you need to be able to have outlets where you can just be transparent and not worry about being judged or someone saying, well, what about this or what about that? And so I've been very intentional about building those relationships. And that's the number one thing I could underline, whether it's a co-founder, whether it's a best friend, whatever that looks like find people that you can just be radically transparent with. And they're just all in for you, regardless of how successful or not you are. They want you to personally be successful. And that's kind of been like my secret, right? It's like, well, how do I deal with all this turmoil? Well, yeah, I'm a solo founder, but I have an incredible team behind me that a lot of people don't see. So, you know, I said, I keep those phones ringing and calling. Hey, we got this challenge. I need this help. I have like, that's the culture I've created in this business. And so now we have these incredible people around me that, you know, make my life a lot easier.
I was going to say there are founder meetups in pretty much almost every city out there. And there's also accelerators you can do. Like Derek mentioned, the DCU FinTech Center for FinTech related startups, really fantastic opportunities that we've done as well, that make it so we're not alone. And so when I'm having a bad day and I go in and or sign in virtually, you know, whatever it is on their Slack group, I feel a lot less lonely because I know there's a lot of people going through the same thing. The other thing that helps is like, I remember like for me, I don't know about you guys, like over COVID, I definitely experienced some periods of depression where I refused to get out of bed, you know, which is a bad sign, you know, where people are waiting for me. I have like tens of, you know, maybe like over 10 Slack messages that people are messaging me like, hey, Christina, this is on fire. This is on fire. And I was just like, I just don't want to get out of bed, you know? And then what ended up happening was like, you know, people reached out to me, or I would, you know, think about like the situation overall, like, hey, you know, I'm extremely still very lucky and privileged to be here. And thinking about like, you know, talking to some friends too. So I'll reach out to some friends, just be like, hey, you know, how do you guys deal with this burnout? And just talking to people helped really to motivate things, but then also realizing like I need a change of pace. I needed to try something new. And that over COVID, it was my opportunity to try different things that I've never done before. So like trying to, you know, go on hikes or things that I've just never really done a lot before. And that was definitely very motivating, as well as realizing there is a life outside of founding a company. And also, yeah, it is lonely, you know, with my regular friend group, right? Like I'm not the type of person who, I'm not a social chaser, meaning like, most of my friends are just like they have regular 9-to-5 jobs at all kinds of different companies of all sizes. And I think that's awesome. But definitely it gets lonely sometimes when I talk to them because they're worried about getting fired the next day or something, and I have to fire someone the next day, right? So the magnitude of challenges, you know, not the magnitude, but just they're different. It's just different challenges to think about. And so in those kind of situations, the good news is like there's a lot of founder communities and meetups, and sometimes if I don't have one, like I literally live in the middle of nowhere in Utah right now, but thankfully there's Zoom and there's online stuff. I just host my own events now, so I'll just host my own event. and then invite people in, and then I'll encourage them to chat with each other and paste their LinkedIn profile or their Twitter handle so people can follow each other. And I think that brings me a lot of joy to see people connecting with each other, introducing co-founders to one another and aspiring founders, and hopefully getting them the inspiration and motivation to start. And so for me, that's also encouraging as well. It's like, if there's no community, just create one for yourself. And just, you can definitely do that. And it's not that time consuming. I mean, for me, I just post a few times on social media and then put a Zoom link there, and then everyone just kind of joins. Or on Discord, people are using Discord more often now, or Slack. And so just finding the right communities is definitely really important, at least for me, because I'm a lot more introverted. I get energy from talking to people. But I will tell you though, I've had some very introverted co-founders where they they get energy just by, they're like a lot more intrinsically motivated, or they might get energy just by talking to a few people internally, like to me, people they trust, and then they feel a lot better. Whereas for me, I'm like, I like talking to a lot of people, meeting new folks. And so just finding what works for you in your own particular situation is also very important as well. But yeah, motivation's hard. You gotta have, sometimes you just gotta have the right people in place, or have the right types of factors, and understand what keeps you waking up in the morning and stuff like that. You just have to kind of learn that for yourself, and then keep going from there. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you. Now I want to hop over to some of the questions from the audience. So here's one question from Bernadette. Exit might not be motivating. How do you handle being made whole while working? And specifically as a solo founder, where it's only up to you to decide how much to pay yourself or how to compensate yourself.
Well, I will say quickly that you should be paying yourself, and that, if a VC is telling you to take no salary, that's especially after you've launched and after you have revenue, right? That's definitely not the case at all. Like, founders, you don't just live for 10 years with no salary and then hope for an IPO and then become a billionaire. It's not like that. There's a scale, and you do expect to pay yourself. I've seen some founder salaries online and my friends have done founder salaries as well in this industry, where I think by the time you raise like 20 or 30 million at that stage, right, you're like a Series A or B. Once you're at that level of either revenue or that kind of stage, then a lot of founders on average, they'll pay themselves around $200,000 at that stage. Actually, is the average there. So that's at least in where I live in the middle of nowhere in Utah, that's more than enough for me to survive. I don't know about SF or New York, but it is a decent amount where hopefully you'll be able to survive and do all right. And as you keep growing, you have every right to pay yourself more. And our good VCs have said, hey, if you need more salary, if you feel like you're not getting enough sleep or getting enough food, whatever it is, like if money's ever a problem for whatever reason, like they want to help you, right? To get that, either to get enough food on your table or to get enough sleep at night or whatever the problem is. Like that's the goal of the VC as well, is to try to help you and to keep you motivated so that you can keep going. So that's a fantastic question though. And definitely, please do pay yourself as soon as you have the means to, even as soon as you get some funding. The first thing we did was we paid ourselves and our employees. And yeah, we did pay our employees a little bit more, right? Because they stuck with us from the very beginning. But we did pay ourselves enough to, to have food on the table, to be food secure, right, is very important. So absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I mean, there was a time where I didn't take a salary for maybe about a year, just because I was transitioning and I had a side hustle. But as soon as we raised salary, made sure I did that, because it allowed me to focus more on the business. And it's almost like, your goal as a startup isn't to just hoard money and just like stay along as life as you can. The goal is to build a scalable, sustainable business that generates revenue and it will grow significantly. And you paying yourself actually allows you to be more effective at doing that, because you focus less about, oh my gosh, how am I going to pay my rent, or how am I going to feed myself, or where am I going to live? And you actually can put more energy into your business. So it's actually really strategic and intentional to do that. And I think it actually positions you to be more successful.
Here's another question from the audience, from Christopher. I'm a solo founder about to start generating revenue with also a passive search for a co-founder. How would you think about scaling without VC backing? What are other main funding sources for successful solo founders?
You can absolutely do that. You can totally, actually that's a better thing to do, is to bootstrap this and not have any VC backing. And hey, you own, almost 100% of your company. There's a lot of successful companies that have done that before. And that's incredible. And I've actually seen situations of the opposite, where companies dilute too quickly or too early on. And then by the time they IPO, the founder owns like 1% equity. It's an extreme example, but I have seen a few of those where once the company IPOs, or when the company has an exit event, the founder ends up having almost nothing. And I think it really depends on your situation, right? Like, will you be able to survive for the next 18 months without any VC funding? That's a critical question. And, for us, for instance, the first time around, the answer was no. It was a hard no. I would have died a long time ago because I just couldn't pay my rent. And I would have had a lot of issues without any funding in place, because I didn't have enough to even pay for my own living expenses. And so it really depends on your personal situation. But if you're about to generate revenue and you're pretty confident in those revenue figures that it's going to be enough to help you survive, and that you don't need to raise VC funding, then absolutely, you should go for it. And then absolutely, I think the way you're doing is correct. Like, be on a passive search for a co-founder if you want to, but also don't be, too discouraged if you don't find one. I had one really good friend of mine in Boston who, he's been on a search for a female technical co-founder for a very long time. And that's very specific. And the reason why he says that is because having a female technical co-founder, yes, it increases your chances of success, but also, yes, it is a lot harder to find, right? And so that's why it's been 3 years and he still hasn't found one. And so again, like, you got to continue working on this and generate the revenue if you can. And then VC is still a great source for funding. Don't be discouraged by the Y Combinator folks who say that they don't want to invest in, solo founders. They actually do. A lot of the YC-backed companies that go through the program are solo founders as well. So definitely don't be discouraged by whatever few powerful VCs tell you or say on the internet. It's still a great source of funding. You can still do accelerators. You can still do everything that someone with a co-founder does, actually. So definitely just go for whatever opportunities you find, and don't worry about being a solo founder. If anyone ever asks you, you can just be like, hey, well, I have the skill sets and this opportunity came up and this idea is too great and can't wait. And so I just decided to work on it. There's really nothing wrong with that at all. So I would hope that no one really brings it up oh, but you're a solo founder, but that's weird. That I don't think that's going to happen, because VCs talk to solo founders all the time. So yeah, Derek, I'll pass it to you.
Well, I definitely had a couple people who called me out on being a solo founder. And I'll tell you the best answer that always shuts them all the way down is, one is, well, I got this great team, and two, look at our traction, right? So if you're about to, generate revenue, like revenue is the answer to a lot of problems in a startup. If your revenue is growing and growing and growing, then you can hire new team members. You can always get the talent that you need. It's always attractive to VCs as well too. And there's, like Christina said, there's some incredible companies. MailChimp just got acquired for $12 billion, right? And they're, they bootstrapped, right? So there's definitely sometimes a stigma that how much money you raise equates to your level of success, and that's not at all the case. And so if you can build a business that scales and grows significantly on revenue, absolutely do that. And if you decide that taking VC money will naturally accelerate in a way that makes a lot of sense, then explore that option. But if you have the right team, the right traction, and the right momentum, raising funding becomes a lot easier when you have a track record of growth.
Thank you all. Christina, back to you. This is a question I've wondered since the beginning of this chat. Is, okay, you've done both solo and co-founder startups. How do you decide between which to pursue? In your next startup, how will you decide whether to go at it alone or have co-founders?
A lot of it depends on the industry that we're in. So if it's an industry where it's a lot more difficult to be able to scale or to grow. And a part of that relates to actually another person's question too, which is how easy it is. How do you decide on what kind of costs it's going to cost, or how do you determine that, right? Because a lot of times founders underestimate how much the startup might cost, or they overestimate and be like, hey, it's essentially zero to get to an MVP, which for our current company isn't true, which is why I needed a co-founder to kind of be there in place. But then for other things, that we work on, it's I realize I don't need a co-founder because, one is that I believe in the idea more than anyone, but also that I can get to the next stage without that co-founder in place, and just and having the confidence to do that as well is half the battle, I feel like. So yeah, I've had situations like that. And then this was a situation on my current company is called Data Bento, and we basically supply market data to any company or app or product that needs market data behind the scenes. And that for us, we determined, that is not a lean startup. Like, it is almost impossible to build an overnight MVP and to launch in a day for this kind of business, especially when our first customer is Goldman Sachs. There's a lot of quality control, risk checks, things that they haven't, that we have to put in place before day one in order to attract a customer like that. And so in that case, I definitely needed more people early on, as a founding team in order to start. So a lot of it just depends on the kind of project that you're tackling and what that industry is. So yeah, Derek, I'll pass it on to you.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, if I had to do it all over again, I would totally get a co-founder. But and when I first started, I was trying to get a co-founder. It wasn't like I said, like, forget the idea of having a co-founder. I'm just going to do it myself, right? Like, that wasn't my attitude. It was just really like, hey, I know I can get started, and I know I can carry this ball a certain distance, and I'll find the right team along the way, right? So that's kind of how it was. I mean, having team members that are talented and add a lot of value to your organization is always a good thing. So if I had to pick, I would choose to have a co-founder. But sometimes it doesn't always play out that way. And I think what makes a great entrepreneur is be able to navigate the challenges that come. And so if I just threw my hands and said, oh, well, I couldn't find a co-founder, so that's it. I'm pretty stubborn. So I'm just like, yeah, I'm not going to let this adversity just like throw me off the course. Like, we're going to get the right team and the right timing and figure it all out. And also a lot of my team members, I treat them like co-founders, even though they're not a co-founder. And we had those conversations of like how we think through things and solve problems together. So I think it really just comes down to the dynamic that you have with the people that you're working with, and also the challenges that you're doing as well too. We're doing something very highly technical, dealing with security and compliance and integrating with POS systems and whatnot. So there's a lot of technical skills that I had to have on the team that I just couldn't do. So having those right people around me made a huge difference in our success and our growth as a business as well.
So Derek, it sounds like you would, everything equal, prefer having a co-founder. Christina, for you, it depends on specific project. But Christina, are there, like, if you could be a solo founder, would you preference that?
Wow, that's really tough. I would say if it was like a tech company, I definitely would prefer having at least one co-founder with me. But if it's like let's say a nonprofit business or some other kind of business model, or if it's like maybe like a bakery, and if I was a really great baker, then I would do it by myself. You get the point. Like, it depends on the kind of industry that you're going to be in and the type of challenges that you need to tackle beforehand, and how much tech do you need to build up, or how much inventory do you need to get, or how much supply chain do you need, like that kind of stuff. Understanding all of those things beforehand is definitely super, super important. So yeah, it does highly depend. It's hard for me to answer, although I do enjoy having a co-founder right now. So it's someone who, just is able to, when I'm having a bad day, like, hey, I still have a co-founder who's working his butt off, or, and then when he's having a bad day as well, I will definitely step up to the plate and take the role of both for those days. So it definitely helps. And I see some comments about like people burning out as solo founders, and that does happen. And it is hard because, yeah, although there's communities you can join and accelerators and everything, at the end of the day, you're still alone, right? In terms of your 9-to-5 kind of working schedule and who you're with and stuff like that. So absolutely that, for me, I think a big part of it is that mental burnout that I do consider. And definitely having a co-founder helps to mitigate that a little bit and helps to motivate me a little bit more. So I would definitely lean slightly more on like having a team, but only not because it's like a higher chance of success or anything like that for me, but at least it's more of a mental thing for me. Like, I can feel like a lot more confident, a lot more safe in my environment just with someone else on the team early on. Yeah.
Would either of you ever join onto someone else's initial idea as their co-founder? Christine, I don't know if that's been the case in your past.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I definitely have. And it's it's totally fine, right? Especially if someone else has so much conviction. And then, it's exciting to see that. And if it's something that I feel like I can add orthogonal skill set to, for whatever reason, like maybe I have more knowledge about the industry, but they have more knowledge about the code, or so there's different areas that you guys can figure out if you fit in well or not. And if I feel like we have orthogonal skill sets and we would make a good team, then that's great. I like Derek's advice of like having a trial period as well. Like be like, hey, I can try this out. We've hired people who do that too. They'll be like, hey, we'll try you out part-time. I've hired people who do that. They'll be part-time for a few months. And then if they do a great job, we'll end up hiring them full-time, or internships. And that's the purpose of an internship for students, right? Is they get a trial period in a company and get that experience. And we teach them a lot, I hope. And then at the end, if we give them a full-time offer, they get to decide on, if they want to take it or not. So absolutely. Those are great ways to kind of try it out and put a feeler out there and just kind of go for it. So, yeah.
I want to grab this last question from the audience, which is from Corey. It says, Derek and Christina, would you recommend giving a potential co-founder a smaller equity stake, 2 to 5%, with a reduced salary to combat the no salary feel? So more generally, how do you think about compensating a co-founder?
We did do that for our first hire, actually. We gave them, so I'll just tell you guys, we gave our first hire for my first company. They got 5% equity and they received a check of like $2,500 a month or something. It's not a lot in the US, just so you know. But the equity was definitely a lot more than the next employee, who ended up getting like 0.4% or something like that. But I will mention that person is not called a founder. Again, a founder gets like, 50%, or if there's 3 of you guys, they get 30% or whatever. So they weren't a founder. They're officially called an employee. They have equity and they have salary as well from day one. And the equity portion, less than, I would say like 5% or less, is considered like, they're called employee number one. That's like a unique category that we've noticed. It's just employee number one. And then employee number two, gets more of a standard, hopefully higher salary package. And a lot lower equity, but it's just motivating for employee number one because they do play a unique role. And it's lonely for them. People never think about it. It's lonely for founder. It's also lonely for employee number one who joins, who's like, oh crap, I have to work for these founders who are way over their heads with this idea. I don't know if I'm ever going to get paid enough, or if I'm ever going to get that equity. I don't have that much equity, and they expect me to do all the work, right? And so thinking about it from the employee number one's perspective as well. We've done it before, yes. Does it work out in the end? It has not for me personally. They've always left eventually, given that they're being paid hardly anything, and they're not getting all the upside that the founders are facing. And so if the company takes off and does really well, suddenly they're like, hey, I want fair equity because I was there with you guys since almost day one. That does happen sometimes. Or if the company doesn't do well, then they're going to be like, I want higher salary. You're paying me like nothing, and I can barely survive, right? And so either way, it's a tough situation. You have to be able to help them set the right expectations and help their salary grow and scale over time as well, so that they can feel like they belong on the team. So yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Christina. I think the only thing I'll really add to that is it just comes back down to that communication piece of making sure that they feel, really valued and a part of the team, and understanding what are the numbers that have to do that is important, and being transparent with them of how to get there, I think is really intentional. So as long as you have those conversations ahead of time, so there's no surprises on either side of it, I think that will help navigate the situations, significantly, and then making sure that they're on board for the long haul. And of course, there are things you can do, like, their clipped investing schedules and stuff like that, that you can help protect yourself. So if it ends up not being the right hire, you can actually get the equity back as well too. Because usually for the first hire, in my situation, I was a little bit tighter on cash. We raised a smaller angel round, and we had enough to for me to go full time, but no big salaries, right? And especially where our first hire was a technical person, and they were making a very strong 6-figure salary before joining me. For them to make more than a 50% cut in their salary is a big adjustment, right? And figuring out, okay, well, what are the numbers we need to do that we all feel comfortable with, and having that open dialogue early and making sure that you set long-term expectations really clear, I think, can really help navigate those conversations.
A little less than 5 minutes left. I want to give each of you an opportunity to impart any final advice or wisdom for people considering taking the solo founder plunge, or for people who have already taken that plunge, how to get to the next level.
I guess I would just quickly say that there's no single playbook for startups in general, right? And so, I know you'll read a bunch of startup books that tell you you must do X, Y, Z in order to succeed, and absolutely that's not true. Founders will take all kinds of journeys. You might take, like some of the commenters say, you can take time off, you can take a sabbatical or have kids, and life, comes at you, right? And so you just keep going, and you can start later on in life. There's no single age, that's also appropriate. So I've seen student founders, I've seen people who retired and then started a company after retirement. There's all kinds of situations, and there's all kinds of journeys that happen, including solo founders, as well as founders with like teams of 6 people. I've seen both succeed. And so again, like, don't be discouraged just because your situation might seem unique at the time to you. And the other thing I should also mention is, me, Derek, and Jake, we've all mentioned this at certain times today, having that community, you're not alone, and understanding that there are other people who are also in your shoes playing this really important role as a founder as well is super, just at least for me, it's very comforting to know that I'm not the only one experiencing these issues. I remember the first time I had to fire someone, I cried the entire night before. I pretty much had a panic attack. And actually what was funny was I was so desperate, I put a message on Facebook at like 1 a.m. being like, has anyone done this before? Like, I literally don't know what I'm doing, right? And Google's not helping me. And actually, my old internship boss reached out to me. I interned literally on Wall Street, and my boss reached out, and he, we did a call late at night, and he told me, hey, I fired 10,000 people. Like, I know how to do this, and here's what you're going to do. And I was like, holy crap, like, this is just incredible to hear someone so confident talk about it. And so the next day, it definitely gave me the confidence to kind of go in and to fire the person. And then what was funny was that when I fired them, they were like, oh yeah, I knew this was coming. Like, don't worry, Christina, I know you're probably freaking out, but like, don't worry. And I was like, what? And it turned out a lot better than I expected. And of course, you always prepare for the worst case scenario. What if they freak out or retaliate or start crying? You never know. But I was really glad to just have that support behind the scenes, someone who I know who's been through that process before, who he's never started his own company, and he literally just works on Wall Street, but he's been through similar experiences as me. And I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. And so yeah, just making sure you have that community. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to tell your, friends or your social media that you're freaking out about something. Chances are you're going to get a lot of really good advice when you open up. And you've probably seen this too, even if you don't do it yourself, like friends who post on Facebook about needing help, and, people will reach out and respond, or on Twitter as well. So just understanding that, that it's not a solo journey, from startup all the way to IPO, right? Or until whatever your goal is. And IPO doesn't have to be your goal, by the way. Acquisition does not have to be your goal. You can have a fantastic business that just generates revenue every year, and maybe you don't want to sell it. You want to keep this because you truly love what you're doing, and that's great as well. So again, no single playbook in this world, no single path to take. So just go do whatever works best and whatever feels best to you. And that's all, that, no one else can judge. I think that's really important to understand, is it's your life. You want to live the life you want to live, not the life according to what other people want you to do or that other people expect of you. If I did that, I would still be an analyst at Goldman Sachs today. Not that that's a bad path, but just
Christina, we have just under 30 seconds. So
I'm so sorry, Derek.
One last 5-word advice, wisdom, Derek. Go for it.
Yeah, so I'll make it tweetable. Being a solo founder doesn't have to be lonely, right? And Christina said a lot about that there. So I'll leave it at that. I'll turn it back over to you, Jake.
Thank you, everyone, for attending this session. I hope you all are inspired to be solo founders.
Excellent. We did it, guys. So if we are still live, thank you again to all the audience members that were able to join us. Thank you, Christina and Derek, for being panelists here, Jake for moderating. I do believe that we are offline, but just in case, Christina, Derek, if you guys want to go to the backstage, we can kind of recap for about 2 minutes, and I will see you over there. For the next session, guys, if you want to go jump on the agenda tab, which is in your top left. Feel free to do so. And there are plenty of great sessions for the rest of the week.